The diamond bracelet hit the hardwood floor with a sound far too delicate for the devastation it caused. Amara Sinclair stood frozen, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, now swollen with the weight of 3 unborn lives. The delicate piece of jewelry glittered where it had landed, white gold studded with tiny diamonds that caught the soft lighting of their brownstone's foyer. She didn't bend to pick it up. She didn't have to. She knew exactly what it was and what it meant. Steve's coat, a tailored charcoal wool blend that she'd bought for his last promotion, had slipped off the hook when she tugged her scarf loose. The bracelet had tumbled from the inside pocket like a confession. It wasn't hers. That more than anything was the point. She stared at it, her mind roaring with all the things she didn't want to admit. Amara had spent the last few months convincing herself that her husband's late nights, his increasingly cold kisses, and his hollow, "I love you" texts were just stress. That all the tension and the distance, it was just pressure from work, from the impending birth, from life. But now this. The bracelet was sleek and expensive, more refined than flashy. Steve had always known how to pick gifts that looked classy while still screaming luxury. It was exactly the kind of thing he'd once surprised her with back when they were young and broke and took the subway together, huddled beneath one coat. But he hadn't bought jewelry for her in almost 2 years, not since they'd started IVF. A slow heat crept into her chest, not from anger, not yet, from realization. A deep, bone-chilling awareness that everything she'd been building, protecting, nourishing, was being dismantled behind her back. She finally leaned down, her motion slow and stiff, and picked up the bracelet. It was still warm from his body heat. Tucked beside the clasp was a tiny folded tag. $8,400. Her breath hitched. More than he'd spent on her engagement ring. She sank into the nearest chair, the one they'd splurged on together when she got her first big bonus at the firm. A throne for a queen, Steve had said back then, his eyes dancing with pride, and something else she hadn't seen in a long time, adoration. Now the leather felt cold against her skin. Empty. Her hand drifted to her belly. "Don't worry, girl," she whispered. "Mama's just catching her breath." The twins kicked in response, or maybe all 3 of them did. It was getting harder to tell. She was 5.5 months pregnant, and the doctors said the triplets were progressing beautifully. A miracle, they'd called it. A miracle Steve hadn't even tried to help her carry. She'd done the bed rest, the hormone shots, the nausea that didn't fade after the first trimester like they said it would. All of it while he disappeared on longer and longer business trips. And now she had proof. Amara opened her phone. Steve had texted an hour ago. "Running late, client dinner. Don't wait up, love you. Love you." She stared at the words, numb. Once those 3 syllables had meant everything. Now they felt like a placeholder, a line dropped in, like punctuation, to end a sentence he didn't mean. Her mind sharpened. No tears, not yet, not before she knew everything. She grabbed her laptop, the same one she used to manage multi-million-dollar portfolios, forecast market shifts, and save clients from financial disaster. It was time to use those skills for herself. Steve had handled most of their joint finances ever since they started combining assets, something about efficiency and legal simplicity. Amara had let him, trusted him. She was managing enough at work, and he always said he liked being the one to take care of things at home. Now she saw it for what it was: control. She logged into their credit card account. At first, the charges looked ordinary: groceries, gas, the occasional Amazon splurge. But then she started cross-referencing. A 5-star restaurant in Midtown booked the same night he told her he was stuck reviewing case files in his office. A boutique hotel in Soho reserved for 2 nights while he claimed to be at a legal conference in Philadelphia. And then there was the lingerie boutique, the same one she hadn't walked into in over a year. Charge after charge, carefully camouflaged, but not enough to hide from someone trained to see patterns. By the time midnight rolled around, her back ached and her babies had stopped kicking, lulled into sleep by the storm of silence in her living room. And then it came, the final confirmation. An email in their shared cloud folder. She clicked it open. It was a sonogram, not of their triplets. This one showed a single fetus, 8 weeks along, labeled Chloe Mercer. Amara didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the glowing screen while her hand rested over the 3 lives she had fought to bring into this world. Steve hadn't just cheated. He was starting another family while she was still carrying his first. The bracelet was still in her palm. She looked at it again. The diamonds no longer glittered. They just sat there, cold, hard, silent, like the man who'd given them to someone else. She stood, knees trembling, and crossed to the fireplace. There on the mantel was a photo of their wedding day. Her in ivory lace, him in a navy suit, smiling like the world belonged to them. She took it down and turned it face down on the stone. Then she whispered one word. Game on. Amara didn't sleep that night. Instead, she watched the sun creep across the windowsill, throwing golden light across the same leather chair where she'd uncovered the ruins of her marriage. Her laptop sat open on the table beside her, the cursor still blinking next to the spreadsheet she'd created one column for each betrayal. She hadn't cried. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because she couldn't afford to. Not yet. She had too much to do. By 7:15 a.m., she had showered, pulled on her softest knit dress, the one that stretched comfortably around her belly, and tied her hair into a sleek bun. She didn't look in the mirror. She didn't need to see the woman staring back at her to know that she was already someone else. Someone her husband wouldn't recognize. Steve had texted just after 2 a.m. Late night. Don't worry, meeting ran long. Can't wait to hold you. She didn't reply. Instead, she packed a new notebook, her tablet, and a small pouch containing the bracelet, the sonogram photo, and 3 printouts of the hotel and boutique charges. Physical evidence, hard copies, the kind no one could accidentally delete. Downstairs, she grabbed the keys to the second car, the one she rarely drove, and slipped into the seat with effort. The car smelled faintly of old perfume and baby wipes, a combination of her life and her future. She sat for a moment, breathing through a sudden wave of nausea. It wasn't just from the pregnancy this time. It was rage. Steve had always called her the calm in his chaos, but today Amara was the storm. Her first stop was her office, early enough to beat the Monday rush, late enough not to draw attention. The receptionist, Becca, gave her a sleepy smile as she walked past. Morning, Miss Sinclair. You're glowing. Amara returned a practiced smile. Thanks, Becca. Must be all the prenatal vitamins? Once inside her office, she locked the door and lowered the blinds. The room, typically a place of analysis and strategy, became her bunker. She opened 2 laptops, her personal one and the company-issued device. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, scanning through their joint investment accounts. She wasn't looking for infidelity here. She was hunting something deeper. Control. What she found stunned her. Steve had moved $75,000 out of their joint high-yield account into a Shell LLC Langford Consulting, something he'd never mentioned before. The transactions were small enough to avoid triggering automatic alerts, but she saw the pattern instantly. Same amount, same time of day, every Friday for 6 weeks. She cross-referenced it with Chloe Mercer's name, wondering if she'd show up somewhere obvious, but the trail went colder. Steve was smarter than that. He used legal shadowing shell accounts, cloaked transfers. But Amara had built her career seeing through smokescreens. Then came the breakthrough. She logged into the cloud account they'd used to share legal documents during their IVF process. Hidden in a subfolder marked estate planning, she found a draft email Steve had apparently forgotten to delete. To Daniel.Morrison@langfordlegal.com, subject contingency discussion message. If Amara escalates emotionally post-delivery, we need grounds to request emergency custody. Begin tracking mood episodes, crying spells, insomnia. Also need Hawthorne's preliminary eval on file. May require expedited psych consult if she breaks down. Amara's mouth went dry. She read the paragraph again, this time slower. Not only was Steve planning to take her babies, he was building a legal foundation to do so before they were even born. He was documenting her potential instability, crying spells, mood episodes. Every hormone-driven moment of pregnancy was now a weapon against her. He was trying to erase her, and he was doing it clinically, strategically, the same way he'd once taught her how to dismantle financial firms from the inside. Amara sat back in her chair, her hands trembling as they cupped her belly. One of the girls kicked sharp and sudden, like she could feel the heat of her mother's fury. "You feel that?" Amara whispered. "That's your mother remembering who she is." She stood, walked to the window, and opened the blinds just enough to let light flood the room. This wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a takeover attempt. And Steve Langford had just triggered the clause she never thought she'd use. Totalva. She didn't go home that night. Instead, she called her mother. Yvonne Sinclair answered on the second ring. "Baby," Amara's voice cracked. "I need to talk. You want me to come to you, or do you want to come to me? I need you here." An hour later, Yvonne arrived. She swept into the office in her signature navy slacks and a camel trench coat, her silver curls pulled back into a tight bun. Her presence always carried weight, like a judge entering a courtroom, because for 30 years that's exactly what she had been. Yvonne closed the door gently and took one look at her daughter before her lips thinned into a line of steel. What did he do? Amara didn't answer with words. She handed over the bracelet first, then the sonogram photo, then the printouts. Then finally she slid the laptop toward her mother and let her read the email aloud. When Yvonne finished, she exhaled slowly. He's not just cheating, she said softly. He's trying to erase you. Amara nodded. Yvonne sat beside her and placed a firm hand over her daughter's shaking one. Then we're going to erase his plan first. They worked until midnight. Amara detailed everything, every strange conversation, every shifting habit, every gaslighting moment that suddenly made sense. Yvonne didn't just listen, she built. They outlined a timeline, identified potential allies, listed threats. By the end of the night, the office whiteboard was filled with names and arrows, dates, and dotted lines. It looked like a crime investigation board, because that's what it was. Yvonne circled one name, last Dr. Patricia Hawthorne. We'll need to dig into her. No credible psychologist backs a diagnosis before the patient's even postpartum. Amara nodded, exhausted but alert. What do I do until then? Her mother didn't hesitate. You play dumb. You act like you don't know a thing. You smile. You let him keep thinking he's winning. And behind the scenes, Yvonne's voice dropped. You build. You gather. You don't give him a single crack to widen. Amara's hand slid over her belly. All three girls were awake now. They rolled and kicked and fluttered, restless with their mother's heartbeat. She whispered, he thinks he's outsmarting me. Her mother's hand tightened on hers. Then let him think that right up until the moment you bury him. Amara became two women. To the world, and most importantly to Steve, she was the same glowing mother-to-be, nesting, smiling, preparing the nursery, humming softly as she rearranged baby blankets and folded onesies. She still answered his calls, still sent heart emojis when he texted, still asked if he wanted Thai or sushi when he was working late. But beneath that surface lived another version of her, cold, sharp, watching. Each morning began the same way. Steve would kiss her forehead with a practiced ease he must have rehearsed in the mirror. Then he'd murmur something like, can't believe we're almost there, babe, before disappearing into the world he thought she couldn't see. She would wave from the front door, her hand resting over her stomach, like any doting wife. But the moment the sound of his car faded down the block, she'd turn, lock the door, and begin her real work. It started with duplicating every shared file she could find. Cloud storage, emails, financial accounts. She archived backup copies to 2 encrypted drives, one hidden beneath the kitchen sink's false drawer, bottom the other delivered by courier to a secure legal contact her mother had recommended. Then came the offline backups, printed emails, bank statements, and travel records, all neatly organized in labeled folders and color-coded with tabs. Red for financials, blue for custody threats, yellow for medical files, and green her smallest but most emotionally charged folder for memories. Love notes, as Steve once wrote, photos of them on their wedding day, cards from when he swore they'd be together forever. She kept that one not because she still believed any of it, but because she needed the contrast. She needed to remember what she was fighting to protect. Not the marriage, the truth. Each afternoon, she spoke with her mother in carefully coded language. Their calls sounded like harmless chats about baby names and cravings, but every phrase had meaning. How's the tea today translation? Have the investigators found anything new? Thinking about going with Lavender for the nursery. Translation, she's making preparations to disappear. By the 3rd week, Linda Carr, the former FBI agent turned private investigator, had joined the team. She was discreet, thorough, and refreshingly blunt. During their first face-to-face meeting, Linda had scanned the folders Amara had assembled, eyebrows arching in approval. I've worked with clients who had 6 months' notice and didn't get half of this documented. Amara gave a dry smile. I only needed 3 weeks to build a $40 million portfolio for a hedge fund in Tokyo. Linda's lips twitched. So you're saying your husband picked the wrong woman to lie to? He's about to find that out. They moved quickly from there. Linda's surveillance team traced Chloe Mercer's identity and discovered that Steve had leased her a sleek loft apartment under the guise of a corporate housing initiative. They followed Chloe discreetly. No confrontation, no intimidation, just patience. Until the day Linda returned with a thumb drive and a single sentence that changed everything. Chloe's pregnant. Amara didn't flinch. She just sat straighter. Does she know about me? Not entirely, Linda replied. From what we gathered, she thinks you're emotionally unstable, that he's staying married until after the babies are born. Amara let out a soft, humorless laugh. Of course. The martyr routine. He's been painting you as paranoid, even mentioned a family history of depression, trying to build a case for emergency custody. I read the email. Linda nodded slowly. He's playing the long game. So are we. That night, Amara sat alone in the nursery. She'd arranged 3 bassinets side by side beneath the window. Soft light glowed from a mobile above, casting dancing shapes onto the walls. Her hand lingered over one of the tiny cribs. She could already imagine her daughters sleeping there, each with their own sound, their own rhythm. She imagined lullabies, midnight feedings, tears and triumphs. And she imagined Steve walking in smiling like the proud father he pretended to be, only to take them from her the moment she showed even a hint of exhaustion. No, she wouldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let her girls grow up thinking silence meant safety or that gaslighting was a synonym for love. She'd been silent for long enough. The next day, she started wearing a new expression. One Steve didn't quite recognize, still warm, still gentle, but distant. "You okay?" he asked one night, his tie loosened, shoes kicked off, glass of bourbon in hand. Amara looked up from her book and smiled. "Just tired. They're getting heavier." He leaned in to kiss her cheek. "We'll hire help. Maybe 2 nannies. I don't want you overwhelmed." Her stomach turned at the word we, as if they were still a team. Still, she nodded. "We'll figure it out." And Steve, satisfied, went back to watching a documentary about powerful men and their empires. Amara watched too, and wondered how long it would take before his fell. 2 days later, the email from Linda came in. Subject code Gray confirmed. Attachment audio file. Amara put in her earbuds and pressed play. Steve's voice came through clearly. "She's getting suspicious. I think it'll be soon. But that's good. Once the babies are here, her hormones will be all over the place. We just need a few documented episodes and Hawthorne will sign off. We'll get emergency custody in 48 hours. Then Chloe's voice. "What about her mother, the judge?" Steve laughed. "She's retired, irrelevant, and Amara, she'll fold. I've seen it before." Amara paused the audio. Her hand shook, but not from fear. From clarity. Steve had no idea he was walking into his own trap. He was staging a performance for an audience he didn't know was recording him. And the more he talked, the more evidence he handed them. That night, she let him touch her belly. He placed his palm over the kicks and whispered, "You're gonna have such a beautiful life, girls." And Amara smiled like a woman in love. But her eyes were shorn. They were the eyes of a strategist waiting for her moment. Because when the time came, she wouldn't scream. She'd destroy him with silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than anything he'd ever said. The kind that left a trail of proof, of justice, of a woman reborn. The first time Amara saw a picture of Chloe Mercer, she expected to feel rage, maybe jealousy or fear, but all she felt was a chilling clarity. Linda Carr had slid the photograph across the cafe table casually, like it was a menu. "Meet your competition." Amara picked up the image and studied it carefully. Chloe was undeniably beautiful, sleek bob, expensive nails, and elegance that came from studied effort and subtle wealth. She was posing outside of a wine bar, laughing at something Steve had said, her hand lightly resting on his chest. She looked like someone in love. "She doesn't know," Amara said quietly. Linda took a sip of her coffee. "No, she thinks you're mentally unstable and that Steve is trying to do the right thing. According to the wire we tapped 2 days ago, she's under the impression that the marriage has been dead for over a year." Amara let the photo fall to the table. "He's good," she murmured. "He's practiced," Linda corrected. "You're not the first." Those words weren't a surprise, but they still landed like a slap. Linda opened her laptop and turned it toward Amara. A folder labeled Langford Precedents glowed on the screen. "I started digging once you brought up the sonogram. I assumed Chloe was a pattern, not a one-off." She clicked. Amara stared as file after file loaded, each bearing a name. Faces, documents, receipts. Angela Ryder, court reporter, allegedly involved with Steve during a deposition-heavy merger case 3 years ago. Ended after 6 months when she questioned his marital status. Rebecca Walsh, former client, divorced with Steve's legal representation, had an affair post-trial, died of a drug overdose 2 months after he cut contact. Maria Santos, legal secretary, pregnant, fired from Langford and Stone after filing an HR complaint, miscarried weeks later from stress and isolation. Amara covered her mouth. This is a pattern." Linda nodded grimly. "Predator pattern. They're not all as dramatic, but the timeline checks out. Flattery, pursuit, intimacy, promise, discard. And when the women become a liability, vanish, fire them, discredit them, or worse. A tremor crawled up Amara's spine. And now Chloe. She's the most elaborate, Linda said. The first he's financially backing beyond gifts. She's been transferred to a paralegal role at Sterling and Chase Langford's biggest competitor, and she just leased a loft downtown. Rent's double what her salary would justify. Paid by a shell company, tied back to Steve's offshore accounts. Amara's voice went flat. So he's financing his mistress's career at a rival firm while trying to take my children and get me institutionalized. Linda folded her arms. In short, yes. Silence sat between them, dense, heavy, pulsing. Finally, Amara looked up. Her voice was calm, precise. Get me an introduction. Linda blinked. To Chloe. She's not the villain, Amara said. Not yet. She's me 5 years ago. Bright, hopeful, convinced he's different. I can't save her, but I can warn her. Linda hesitated. It's risky. Amara leaned in. So is letting another woman walk into the same trap I barely crawled out of. 2 days later, the meeting was arranged. Linda had reached out to Chloe through a back-channel source posing as a financial recruiter for elite legal talent. Chloe, always eager for advancement, agreed to meet for coffee. She never expected Amara to walk in instead. They met at a quiet cafe in a bookstore near the Riverwalk. Neutral ground. No one looking for a custody battle or a domestic scandal would ever think to look there. Chloe was seated, already sipping from a vanilla latte and tapping through her phone. Amara approached slowly. Her heart pounded not from nerves but from urgency. Chloe glanced up and froze. Amara watched her blink twice, recognition slow but certain. You're... Yes, Amara said, simply taking the seat across from her. I'm the wife. Chloe stiffened. Look, I don't know what you think. You're pregnant with his child. He told you I'm unstable, that he's only staying for legal reasons, that once the babies are born, he'll file and come to you. Chloe's mouth opened, then closed. Amara slid a manila envelope across the table. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to show you what's coming. Chloe hesitated before opening it. Inside, bank statements, emails, screenshots of Steve's messages to past women, and a confidential memo Maria Santos had written after her miscarriage. At the top of the packet, a copy of Chloe's sonogram downloaded from Steve's cloud without her knowledge. Where did you get this? She whispered. He left it on our shared cloud drive, Amara said. He didn't even bother deleting it. Chloe's hand trembled. She sifted through the pages, face paling, as the pieces clicked together. This could be fake. It's not, Amara said softly. But even if it were, to ask yourself this, why would I come here? I could ruin you publicly, destroy your reputation, drag you to court, but I didn't. Chloe looked up. Her eyes glistened. He told me you were broken, that you hated being pregnant, that you didn't even want the babies. Amara's throat tightened. I've wanted these girls for 5 years. I've bled for them, suffered through failed rounds. I'd die for them. That's why I'm here. Chloe's voice cracked. I thought I was different. He said I wasn't like the others. Amara let out a breath. That's what he said to Maria, to Angela, to Rebecca. Recognition flashed across Chloe's face at the last name. She's the one who... Yes. Chloe went quiet. The weight of what she was carrying, literally and metaphorically, settled around her like a noose. I don't know what to do. You don't have to know right now, Amara said gently. But if you stay in this, he will destroy you. And when you become inconvenient, he'll do what he always does. Silence stretched between them. Then Chloe did something Amara didn't expect. She took the envelope, tucked it into her purse, then reached across the table and gripped Amara's hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. Amara nodded. Now you do. They left separately. Back at her car, Amara slid into the driver's seat and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She didn't know what Chloe would do next, but she had planted a seed. And if that seed grew, Steve wouldn't just lose a mistress. He'd lose his perfect little narrative. Because now the other woman had a file of her own. And it had just been delivered by the wife he underestimated. The night after her meeting with Chloe, Amara stood by the nursery window gazing out into the rain-slick street below. The city hummed faintly, a quiet blur of movement and fog. Inside the house, all was still. Steve had gone to bed hours ago, mumbling something about a deposition in the morning. But Amara was wide awake. She wrapped her robe tightly around her body, one hand on the side of her stomach. 3 distinct thuds met her palm, 3 tiny feet pressing back against her touch. Her girls, her strength, her future. She closed her eyes and whispered, I'm going to get you out of this. I promise. The clock was ticking. Steve had no idea that Chloe was wavering, that the neatly compartmentalized life he'd built was beginning to crumble from both ends, and Amara intended to keep it that way for now. She spent the next morning reviewing everything with her mother and Linda. The war room had moved to Yvonne's condo, a penthouse overlooking the courthouse, an irony they all silently acknowledged. "We're out of time," Amara said. "He's moving faster. I think he's planning something drastic the moment I give birth." Yvonne nodded slowly. "I've seen cases like this. Men who use the legal system like a scalpel, emotionless, strategic. They don't need you gone, just discredited." Linda added, "If he's going to file for emergency custody, he'll wait until your most vulnerable moment, probably within 48 hours of delivery." "So we deliver first," Amara said. "On our terms, quiet, controlled, then we disappear." They all paused. Yvonne looked over the rim of her glasses. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm ready." Linda leaned in. "You'll need a new identity, a secure location, someone to coordinate with the birth center. I can handle the logistics, but the hard part, staying gone, staying quiet, that falls on you." Amara nodded. "I've lived with silence long enough. Now I'll use it to survive." The plan began that afternoon. Step 1, transfer all prenatal care to Serenity Birth and Wellness Center, a discreet midwife-led facility in upstate New York that catered to high-profile clients seeking privacy. With her OB's quiet cooperation secured through both trust and legal leverage, Amara scheduled an induction 2 weeks earlier than expected. Step 2, create a paper trail to make it seem like she was still in the city. Pre-scheduled Amazon deliveries, texts from her phone timed via automation software, emails drafted in advance to go out every 2 days. Steve wouldn't suspect a thing. Step 3, a decoy emergency. Linda had a contact in NYPD run a stage incident near Steve's office the week of the birth, enough to keep his attention for 48 hours. Step 4, vanish. Back home, Amara moved through the motions of everyday life with eerie calm. She cooked dinner, folded laundry, kissed Steve on the cheek when he left for work, all while finalizing the paperwork for a legal name change, setting up a private trust for her daughters, and loading encrypted documents onto a drive she wore on a chain under her shirt. The only moment she faltered was when she stepped into the nursery for what she knew might be the last time. She touched each of the bassinets, letting her fingers trail over the soft linens and stuffed animals she'd chosen so carefully. "I'll bring you back here someday," she whispered. "When it's safe, when it's ours again." Then she closed the door. 2 days later at 4:43 a.m., Amara, Yvonne, and Linda climbed into a black SUV and disappeared into the fog. The drive was long, quiet, no music, no small talk. Just the sound of tires on wet pavement and the occasional murmur from the GPS. Amara rested her head against the window, staring out at the trees blurring past. Her hands were folded over her stomach. The babies were active, almost as if they sensed the urgency humming in the air. When they arrived at Serenity Birth, everything moved with calm efficiency. The midwives were professional, warm, and entirely discreet. They welcomed Amara like they'd known her forever, ushering her into a private suite, lit with soft golden light and the scent of lavender. She changed into the birthing gown slowly, her hands trembling only once, when she removed the chain with the encrypted drive and handed it to Yvonne. "Don't lose it," she said. Her mother smiled gently. "I'd sooner lose a limb." Labor began quickly, faster than anyone expected. The room filled with soft voices, steady instructions, firm hands. She didn't cry out. She didn't panic. She bore down through the pain with a quiet ferocity that stunned even the attending midwife. "She's stronger than most," one whispered. "No," Yvonne corrected. "She's fighting for more than herself." At 11:11 a.m., Lyric Sinclair Langford entered the world with a sharp, piercing cry. 3 minutes later came Zion Quieter, blinking up at the ceiling as if measuring it. And finally, at 11:19, little Marlowe arrived, red-faced and furious, fists clenched, like she already knew the world wasn't fair. Amara held each of them to her chest, kissing their damp heads, whispering their names over and over again. Lyric, Zion, Marlowe. 3 perfect heartbeats, 3 pieces of her soul. After they were cleaned and swaddled, Amara lay back against the pillows and let herself exhale fully for the first time in weeks. "They're here," she murmured, eyes wet but steady. "They're safe." Yvonne reached out and clasped her hand. "And so are you." Outside, the snow had started to fall thick and soft against the windows. It blanketed the world in silence. The kind of silence that came not from fear but from victory. Amara didn't know what would come next, what Steve would do when he found the empty house, how far he would go to reclaim control. But for now, she had won the only battle that mattered. She had her girls. And he didn't. The birth suite was quiet now. After the cries and chaos, after the soothing coos of midwives and the rhythmic scribble of charts, after the precise swaddling and whispered vitals, stillness settled in like fog over the river. Amara lay propped up in the bed, her arms aching in the best possible way, holding 3 lives against her chest. Their tiny bodies rose and fell in unison with her breath, like they had always been a part of her lungs. 3 miracles tucked close beneath a soft cotton blanket. Lyric, Zion, Marlowe. 3 names she'd whispered to herself for months like a mantra she dared not speak aloud. 3 identities that had existed in shadows until now that they were real and warm and sleeping soundly on her skin. The snow outside thickened, clinging to the corners of the window like lace. The suite glowed with a soft golden light from the bedside lamp. It was the kind of light that made everything feel safe, suspended, like time had paused just for this moment. Linda had left to arrange post-birth transport, moving through the world as Amara's unseen shield. Yvonne sat on the opposite chair, her glasses low on her nose, watching the 3 newborns with the same reverence she once reserved for closing arguments. "You did it," Yvonne said quietly, her voice breaking the silence but not disturbing it. Amara looked down at her daughters and smiled. They did it. They fought the whole way. Yvonne stood and crossed the room. She brushed a gentle hand over Lyric's downy head, then Zion's, then Marlowe's. "They'll be warriors," she murmured. "Like their mother, but smarter, stronger, because of what you've done." Amara let her eyes drift closed for a moment. Not sleep, just rest. Just space to let the past 48 hours settle. "I keep thinking I'll wake up," she said softly. "That I'll open my eyes and still be in the nursery at home. Steve in the next room. Lying to me. Lying to everyone." Yvonne squeezed her shoulder. "He may be in the next room of some courtroom one day, but he'll never be in your future again." Amara didn't respond. She didn't need to. The baby stirred slightly. Lyric twitched her nose. Zion kicked softly. Marlowe let out a brief, indignant squeak and then fell back into sleep. Amara adjusted their blanket with delicate care, feeling the enormity of everything pressed down around her, not as a weight, but as a crown. She was someone else now. Not just a mother, not just a strategist, not just a woman who survived betrayal. She was the beginning of a new legacy. And her daughters were the first proof that she could build something unbreakable from the ruins. Later that evening, the birth center helped her transition into a private residence just 2 miles away, an estate owned by one of Yvonne's oldest friends, a woman who owed her life and career to a ruling handed down decades ago. They're surrounded by books and gardens, and quiet Amara began her recovery. She never called it hiding. This wasn't exile, it was rebirth. Each day, the babies grew stronger. They were fed in shifts, Lyric with the slow, thoughtful calm of someone reading the world as she drank. Zion with tiny bursts of hunger, eyes darting like she didn't want to miss anything. And Marlowe bold and loud, always demanding to go first and crying the moment her turn ended. They were only days old, but their personalities already hummed beneath the surface. Amara documented everything. Photos, journals, letters written in ink she'd save until the day they could read. To Lyric, she wrote, "You were first like the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. You remind me of music, of peace before the storm. You were my stillness. To Zion, you came into this world already watching, calculating. I know you will be quiet but not silent. Like me, I will teach you how to be heard without raising your voice. To Marlowe, you were born last but screamed the loudest. Your fists were already clenched. You are fury and fire, and I will teach you how to burn without turning to ash." Each letter was sealed in its own envelope, dated and stored in the drawer of her writing desk. She wasn't sure when the girls would read them. Maybe when they were 16, maybe sooner. Maybe when they asked her why they didn't have baby pictures with their father, or why they didn't celebrate birthdays with both sides of the family. And when that day came, she wouldn't lie. She would tell them the truth. That the man who gave them life tried to take hers. That he wanted them not as daughters but as leverage. That their existence had threatened his control, and that he had crafted plans to erase the one person who had brought them into the world. And that they, tiny and unborn, had saved her. It was their kicks that reminded her she wasn't alone. Their heartbeats that beat back the silence. Their pending arrival that gave her the courage to leave. They were not just her children. They were her rebellion. 3 tiny warriors with lungs full of storm and veins full of legacy. As she lay in the armchair one night, one girl on her chest and the other 2 tucked into bassinets beside her, Amara whispered softly into the dark, "You saved me." None of them stirred, but she felt it in energy in the room, as if the walls themselves remembered. Amara turned her gaze to the ceiling. Steve still didn't know they were born. He still thought he had time, still thought she'd play the role he wrote for her, the weeping wife, the unstable mother, the one who could be pushed out of the picture with the right lie and the right signature. But that version of her had died on the delivery table. And in her place stood someone who would not be erased. Someone who had already rewritten the ending. She leaned back and let the silence wrap around her. Not the silence of fear. The silence of someone preparing for the final move. The quiet before the fall. Because Steve Langford didn't know it yet, but his war had already ended. And the victors were sleeping soundly in the arms of the woman he had tried to destroy. The letter arrived at Steve's law office on a crisp Thursday morning, sealed in ivory parchment, and stamped with a private courier's insignia. His assistant placed it on his desk like any other document, unaware that it was about to crack open the illusion he had spent months constructing. Inside was a single line handwritten in flawless cursive. "Check the nursery, you are never the king." There was no signature, no return address, just 7 words that made his skin crawl. Steve dropped the note, rising abruptly from his desk. He didn't call anyone, didn't alert Chloe, didn't even put on his coat. He simply left. 20 minutes later, he burst through the front door of their townhouse, the echo of his footsteps ricocheting off the walls like accusations. The house was silent, eerily so. "Amara," he called, his voice cracking the stillness. No answer. The smell of lavender still clung faintly to the air, like she had been there only moments ago. Like she had chosen to leave her absence behind deliberately. He moved toward the nursery, a room he hadn't entered since the wallpaper went up. She'd asked him to help pick out cribs once, and he'd muttered something about delegating to the interior designer. That had been months ago. Now he pushed the door open and froze. The bassinets were gone. Every blanket, every toy, every framed sonogram photo vanished. The changing table had been stripped. The drawers emptied. Even the rocking chair was missing. The only thing left behind was a single mobile still spinning, slowly casting dancing shadows across the walls, and taped beneath it a photograph. Amara standing in front of a snowy window, holding 3 swaddled newborns to her chest. Her eyes stared directly into the lens. Calm, triumphant. She looked nothing like the woman he'd gaslit. She looked like a queen. Steve stumbled back, breath catching in his throat. He tore the photo from the mobile and flipped it over. Lyric, Zion, Marlowe. Born free, far from you. He collapsed onto the floor. No rage, no screaming. Just the slow, agonizing realization that he had lost. He pulled out his phone and dialed Chloe, straight to voicemail. Next, he called Amara's number, disconnected. He opened the tracking app he'd secretly installed on her phone months earlier, only to find it wiped. Device not found. It wasn't just the photo, it was the silence. She was gone, and she'd taken the one thing he couldn't replace: his legacy. But Amara wasn't simply hiding, she was rebuilding. Hundreds of miles away, tucked into the hills outside Hudson, New York, the estate had become a haven. The girls grew stronger each day, their feeding schedules aligning like gears in a well-oiled machine. Amara began walking again, her body regaining strength one breath at a time. She slept in short bursts, always with one hand resting on the side of a bassinet. Her world had narrowed to the essentials: warm, milk, steady heartbeats, and the occasional snowfall that painted the world in white forgiveness. But she wasn't idle. Each afternoon, while the girls napped and Yvonne kept watch, Amara disappeared into the study, a room with a long mahogany desk and shelves that smelled of old law books and dust. There she worked, not on a case, not on financial forecasts or market strategies. She worked on her return. Linda called every morning at 8 a.m. sharp. "We found the paper trail for the fake custody strategy. Steve met with a judge's clerk in Westchester last month. Promised a campaign donation in exchange for expedited emergency filings." Amara took notes. "Is the clerk cooperating?" Quietly, she handed over transcripts. "That's leverage." And Chloe, she moved out. No forwarding address. Said she didn't want to be found. "We think she left the state." Amara paused. "Good." She also filed a harassment report against Steve. Claimed he threatened to ruin her if she ever went public. "We've got audio." Amara closed her eyes for a moment. "He's unraveling." "He's cornered," Linda corrected. "Men like him don't implode. They explode. We need to be ready." "We are." Later that night, Amara fed Marlowe under the soft light of the nursery lamp. The baby clutched the bottle fiercely, eyes locked on her mother's face. "You're not just eating," Amara whispered. "You're gathering strength." The bassinet beside them creaked slightly as lyrics shifted, and Zion made a small sigh in her sleep. All three of them were warriors, but they didn't know it yet. Amara would teach them, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with clarity, with truth. And one day when they were old enough to understand, she would show them everything. The files, the lies, the evidence, not to burden them, but to empower them. They would know their story not as victims of a fallen dynasty, but as daughters of the woman who dismantled it with silence and strategy. Weeks passed. The girls began to recognize her voice turning toward her when she sang. They smiled. They cooed. Their eyes began to follow movement. Their world stretched beyond the edge of the crib. And so did Amara's. She returned to herself slowly, first through writing, then with morning walks. Eventually, she reconnected with the firm she once helped build quietly under a new consultancy title. Remote work, discrete assignments, enough to keep her mind sharp without revealing her location. Yvonne handled the legal side, preparing documents, contacting allies, filing protective orders in jurisdictions that Steve wouldn't anticipate. The former judge had returned to the courtroom in spirit, if not in robe. And every move they made carved out another step toward the future. A future where Amara wouldn't have to look over her shoulder. A future where her daughters would never doubt their worth. A future where the man who thought he could own her story would learn that queens don't play chess with pawns. They remake the board. And beneath the snow-covered trees in a house full of lullabies and sealed envelopes, a queen was waiting not for rescue, not for revenge, but for the moment she would rise, from underground, into the light. Chloe Mercer hadn't cried since she left the loft. Not when she packed what little she'd brought into 2 suitcases. Not when she canceled the lease and walked out with the keys in an envelope. Not when she sat on a Greyhound bus headed to the 1-bedroom apartment in Vermont that her cousin had offered for as long as you need. But tonight she did. It wasn't the pain that broke her. It was the guilt. She sat on the floor beside a twin bed that smelled faintly of cedar and age, the overhead light casting long shadows against the wall. The sonogram photo lay on her lap, her baby just a curved blur in the gray and white print. A life, a decision, a truth she couldn't ignore anymore. Steve Langford had promised her a new world. Instead, he had dragged her into someone else's war and offered her as a pawn. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 weeks. After Amara's confrontation, she'd cut all contact, deleted his number, blocked every known alias, and still his shadow followed her into every room. She'd watched herself unravel in slow motion. The moments Amara's words had echoed in her mind, the timeline that no longer made sense. The look in Steve's eyes when he said, "Don't ask questions, you know how this works." And worst of all, the moment she realized she wasn't the first. That she'd walked into a house of mirrors mistaking flattery for truth and reflections for reality. But something had shifted in her now. She wasn't just the woman who got played. She was the woman who still had time to choose who she wanted to be next. That choice began with a knock on her door. Chloe, her cousin, called gently from the hallway. "Someone's here for you." She stood slowly, her hand instinctively covering her belly. At the door stood a woman with a sleek black coat, salt and pepper hair tied into a twist, and eyes that said she missed nothing. "Chloe Mercer," she asked. "My name's Linda Carr. I'm here on behalf of Amara Sinclair." Chloe's throat went dry. "Is something wrong?" "No," Linda said calmly. "Something is finally going right." She stepped inside and handed Chloe a small folder. "I'm here because you're the only person left who can collapse Steve Langford's house of cards from the inside." Chloe looked down at the folder. Inside were transcripts, financial records, and a sworn affidavit form with her name already printed at the top. "Why me?" she asked softly. Linda didn't hesitate. "Because you're credible, because you were manipulated, and because what you saw, can't be ignored in court. You're the witness he didn't plan for." "I don't want revenge," Chloe said. "I want peace. I want my child to have a chance to grow up safe. Then help the other children have the same. Help those 3 girls who are already on the run from a man who calls fatherhood a strategy." Chloe sat heavily on the couch. "I feel like I enabled all of it." "You survived it," Linda said. "Now help end it." The next morning, Chloe sat across from a federal investigator in a private office arranged by Linda's contacts. She spoke slowly, carefully, reading from her notes and offering copies of the messages Steve had sent her. She admitted to knowing he was still married. She admitted to accepting financial help in exchange for silence. But she also described the threats, the manipulation, the way Steve made her feel as if the only version of the truth that mattered was the one he invented. When she finished, the agent leaned forward. "Would you be willing to testify if needed?" Chloe nodded. "Not for me, for her, For the babies? For all the women before me? Outside, it began to snow again. As Chloe stood at the glass doors of the office building watching the flakes fall, she felt something she hadn't in months. Lightness. She had awakened, not just to the truth, but to herself. She walked back to her apartment with a steady pace, her hand never leaving her belly. She whispered to her child, "You will never be used, never be traded for power. You'll know love, real love." And somewhere she hoped Amara could hear her. Because while the mistress had once been asleep, wrapped in delusion and deception, she was now a sword forged in guilt, sharpened by clarity. She wasn't the villain of Amara's story anymore. She was part of the reckoning. Avalanches don't begin with noise. They start with pressure. A single snowflake, a vibration, a shifting layer beneath what looks like calm. And Amara knew Steve's mountain was about to fall. But she wasn't waiting for it. She was building it, piece by piece. She'd spent years studying systems, economic collapses, hostile takeovers, and strategic bankruptcies. But nothing compared to dismantling a man who built his empire on silence and entitlement. The morning after Chloe signed her sworn affidavit, Amara sat in her study and read every word aloud to Yvonne. Each sentence felt like a steel beam locking into place. "He threatened to ruin me if I ever spoke. He told me the pregnancy would secure our future, then said I was disposable. He said his wife would crack after the birth and he'd get full custody of the girls." Yvonne took off her glasses slowly and laid them on the desk. "It's not just a pattern, it's a pathology." Amara nodded, "And now we can prove it." Linda called that afternoon with more good news. "We've secured statements from two former employees, Angela Ryder's sister and Maria Santos's former supervisor. They both confirmed Steve manipulated, seduced, and discarded them. One has copies of texts. The other saved a resignation letter that references inappropriate coercion. Corroboration," Amara said. "Enough for the ethics board to open a formal investigation. More than enough." They moved quickly. Yvonne used her judicial network to request a confidential hearing with the Bar Association's disciplinary board. Linda drafted a master timeline of Steve's professional and personal misconduct. Chloe's affidavit became the anchor. But Amara wasn't just relying on institutions. She was preparing for the court of public opinion. A documentary producer friend of Linda's offered to begin development on a docu-series exploring corruption in high-stakes family law. With Amara's permission, they drafted a pilot script anonymously titled The Custody Game. It wouldn't air until the time was right, but the wheels were in motion. Everything was. The avalanche wasn't waiting to happen anymore. It was moving. And Steve, he felt it, even if he didn't know what it was. He'd begun spiraling. Reports trickled in that he'd fired 2 junior associates in 1 week, slashed the firm's budget with no explanation, held a closed-door meeting with his PR firm that ended in shouting. He'd started drinking more heavily, calling Chloe again blocked, hiring a private investigator to track Amara's bank records unsuccessful. He even tried to access her hospital records only to find them sealed. Then came the subpoena, delivered directly to his office in a manila envelope marked urgent. Inside was a summons to appear before a judicial review board regarding ethical violations, misconduct, and coercion. Attached were Chloe's affidavit, financial records, linking shell payments to her housing, and an audio recording of a conversation between Steve and a former client, clearly discussing fabricated custody tactics. Steve read the packet twice, then hurled it across the room. But the avalanche was no longer theoretical. It had reached his front door. At the estate, Amara felt it too. Not panic, but movement, momentum. The shift that comes when enough truth accumulates to crush denial. She spent every evening journaling while the girls slept, recording everything not just for evidence, but for healing. One night she wrote, "He thought I would scream. Instead I waited. He thought I would beg. Instead I built. He thought I would fall. Instead I made the ground shake." She sealed that entry in an envelope marked, "For the girls when you ask how I survived." Across the state, Chloe had done the same. In a tiny apartment with mismatched curtains and a rented crib, she sat by the window with her laptop open, reviewing the final draft of a piece she planned to submit to a women's justice blog. It was titled "How to Wake Up When You're the Other Woman." She never mentioned Steve by name, but the truth bled through every line. Linda had vetted the article and timed its release carefully. It would publish on the same day Steve was scheduled to appear before the disciplinary board. And just like that, the snow would start to slide. That night, Amara stood beneath the stars in the backyard of the estate, the cold biting at her fingers, the monitor clipped to her side so she could hear every breath her daughters made. Yvonne stepped outside beside her, wrapping a shawl tighter. He's slipping, she said quietly. You've done more damage to him without lifting a finger than any courtroom ever could. I didn't want revenge, Amara said. I wanted freedom. Then you've earned it. She shook her head. Not yet, but soon. Inside, Marlowe stirred. Amara turned to go, her feet crunching lightly in the frost. And as she stepped over the threshold, a message pinged on her phone. From an anonymous number. Just one line. You think you've won, but I'm not done. Amara stared at the screen. Then she smiled. Not fear, not anger. Strategy. She turned to Yvonne. He's lashing out. Yvonne arched an eyebrow. What did he say? Amara held up the phone. Exactly what I wanted him to. Because an avalanche doesn't fear the man shouting at it from below. It just keeps coming. The morning Amara walked into the Manhattan Family Court building, the sky was bruised with the threat of rain, and the air tasted like something inevitable. She didn't take the private elevator, didn't slip in through the service entrance, didn't hide behind a team of attorneys, no security entourage, no press shield, no dramatics. Just her, a woman in a clean tailored coat, hair pulled back into a single braid, eyes steady, step unwavering. It was a Tuesday. The lobby was half full, legal assistants balancing coffee cups with document boxes, nervous fathers checking their watches, women clutching manila folders like shields. No one recognized her, not at first. To them, she was just another name on the docket. Until Steve Langford arrived. He was late. He stormed through the revolving doors like the world owed him a clean floor in a bowing crowd. His suit looked expensive but wrinkled in a way that betrayed a restless night. He scanned the lobby, then froze. Amara was already standing by the elevator. And for the first time in months, he saw her. Not the weeping, wounded woman he remembered from the mirror of his manipulations, but something else, something harder, clearer, whole. Amara, he said stiffly, as if trying to conjure charm from muscle memory. Steve, she replied, voice low but direct. Nice tie. A little tight. He flinched. They stood in silence as the elevator dinged. She entered. He followed, cautious. Only the two of them. The doors slid shut. I didn't expect you to come in person, he said, avoiding eye contact. Then you didn't read the summons properly, she replied. They require all involved parties to be physically present for preliminary ethics hearings. He scoffed. It's all performative. These boards don't punish rainmakers. Amara turned to face him fully. Is that what you think? I am a performance? No, he muttered more to himself. A problem. The elevator opened. They stepped into the fourth-floor corridor lined with frosted glass and the hush of legal gravity. Outside hearing room B, a clerk checked names against a printed list. Steve leaned toward Amara. You really want this to go public? It already is, she said. You just haven't heard the noise yet. Inside the panel waited 3 board members, 1 legal ethics advisor, and a stenographer. The room was clinical, brightly lit with the sterile scent of toner and tension. Amara took her seat. Her attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Kira Matheson, nodded to her reassuringly. Steve sat opposite his lawyer, whispering something that clearly went unheard. The presiding chair cleared her throat. This hearing concerns allegations of misconduct and coercion against Mr. Stephen Langford, as submitted via evidence packet number 472G. We begin today with testimony from Miss Amara Sinclair. Steve's head whipped toward her. You're testifying first. Of course, she said coolly. I'm the one who survived you. Her statement was simple, measured, devastating. She spoke of manipulation, gaslighting, the mental warfare that never left bruises but bled her all the same. She presented financial records that showed diverted assets, timeline discrepancies that made Steve's custody strategy look premeditated and predatory. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to, because every word was a nail in the coffin of Steve's illusion. Kira handed over the supplemental exhibits, Chloe's affidavit, screenshots of encrypted chats, a recording short but sharp of Steve saying, the key is getting her to crack. Once she's institutionalized, custody is automatic. Steve's lawyer stammered through a protest. That clip is taken out of context. The presiding chair held up a hand. We've read the context. The problem isn't its absence, it's the clarity. Steve was silent, for the first time visibly shaken. And then a second name was called. Ms. Chloe Mercer. From the gallery, Chloe rose, dressed in gray minimal makeup and a calmness that suggested the storm had already passed through her. She didn't look at Steve as she took the stand. She looked at Amara. And then she spoke. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with resolve. I believed him. I thought I was helping a man escape a toxic marriage. But it was a lie, all of it. He used me just like the others. I was part of a pattern, not a future. She described the meetings, The money, the veiled threats. She handed over signed receipts, email drafts, even a copy of a prenup amendment Steve tried to draft in her favor, dated 3 weeks before Amara gave birth. The board listened mostly expressionless, but visibly rattled by the breadth of what had been presented. Steve's attorney requested a recess, denied. He demanded that Chloe's testimony be stricken due to her emotional bias, denied again. When Steve finally took the stand, his voice cracked before the first sentence. "I am being mischaracterized," he began. "I have always acted in the best interests of my clients, my firm, and yourself," the board chair cut in, "which may soon be all you have left." The hearing adjourned after 3 hours. As they exited into the hallway, Steve tried one last time to corner Amara. "I'll make this go away. We can negotiate something. You don't want to drag this through the mud for the girl's sake." She looked at him like he was a stranger asking for directions to a city that no longer existed. "I already walked through the mud," she said. "I planted roots there. You just never looked down." With that, she walked past him, past the court officers, past the whispers. She didn't need the final verdict to know what came next. Because the real victory wasn't a courtroom declaration. It was walking through the same doors he thought she'd never dare enter. On her own terms. Alive. Free. Steve Langford always believed he could outrun consequence. Even as the walls caved in, he told himself that strategy would save him. Reputation, wealth. A press release here, a settlement there, he could spin anything. Until the knock on his door came at dawn. 2 federal agents. A warrant. The second arrest of Steve Langford didn't happen in a courtroom or a downtown boardroom. It happened on the steps of his Westchester home with a neighbor's dog barking in the background and a trembling assistant fumbling a coffee tray in the driveway. The charges this time weren't merely ethical violations or misconduct. They were criminal. Wire fraud, coercion, tampering with court proceedings, obstruction, witness intimidation. Someone had finally connected the last piece of the puzzle. And it hadn't been Amara. It had been Chloe. 3 days earlier, she received a plain envelope from an anonymous email account. Inside was a USB drive, encrypted. She took it to Linda. What they found stunned them both. Video surveillance footage of Steve in his firm's private records room, shredding case files and moving boxes labeled Merger 2017 and Amara Contingency Plan. Linda cross-referenced the footage with a former paralegal's testimony and timestamps from internal server logs. It wasn't just insurance fraud and manipulation of custody proceedings anymore. He had falsified corporate audits, hidden assets, used firm resources to bribe 2 court clerks and conceal his own marital assets before the divorce proceedings ever began. The final betrayal wasn't against Amara. It was against the system he thought he controlled. And it was Chloe who handed over the final proof. Not out of revenge, but justice. "It's not about him anymore," she said when she submitted the files. "It's about the children, mine, hers, everyone he could have hurt next." The arrest made headlines within hours. Prominent family attorney Steve Langford indicted in multi-state fraud and custody tampering case. From powerhouse to prison, a legacy built on lies. But Amara didn't read the news. She was in the garden holding Marlo on her hip while Lyric napped and Zion practiced reaching for the mobile above her crib. Yvonne stood nearby, phone in hand. "He's been booked," she said. "No bail. He's being held pending a full federal review." Amara looked up, blinking in the sunlight. "Let it fall," she said. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. There was no need. Justice wasn't a firework. It was a slow, cold wind that eroded stone. Later that evening, she opened the sealed envelope she had saved for this moment. Inside a letter she wrote months ago, dated the night she fled the townhouse. "Dear Steve, you once said that silence was my greatest weakness. You were wrong. Silence was the blade I sharpened behind closed doors. Every time you dismissed me, every time you erased me, every time you underestimated me. It wasn't rage that ended you. It was the quiet moments you thought didn't matter. Like the breath before I walked away, the breath before I gave birth, the breath before I chose truth over survival. You were never the storm. I was." She burned it in the fireplace. Because she didn't need to send it anymore. That night, Chloe called her from Vermont. The conversation was short but meaningful. "He's where he belongs," Chloe said. "I know," Amara replied. "I never thought I'd help take him down." "You didn't help," Amara said gently. "You finished it." There was a pause. "Do you think they'll be okay?" "The girls. They already are." She didn't explain. Didn't talk about the new trust she'd set up under their names. Didn't mention the children's book she was writing, 3 Lions in the Snow, a fable about triplets born in a storm who learned to roar in harmony. Didn't need to, because the past had been buried, not ignored but honored. The lessons kept, the pain transformed. Amara hung up, kissed each of her daughters goodnight, and stood at the nursery doorway looking in. 3 cribs, 3 nightlights, 3 futures untangled from the chains of a man who once thought he could own their names. She whispered to the darkness, "You are not broken by where you come from. You are built by how you rise." Outside, the stars blinked above the pines, and somewhere in a concrete holding cell, Steve Langford sat alone. No strategies, no signatures, no silk-tied illusion left to shield him. Only silence. The same silence he once weaponized against her, now returned to collect. It began as many legacies do with a name. Not Steve's. Not the Langford families, which now only lingered in footnotes and disgraced firm listings. But Sinclair. Amara Sinclair. The woman who had walked into the fire and come out carrying more than survival, carrying a blueprint for rebuilding. A year had passed since the arrest. Steve remained behind bars, his trial date set for the fall. His firm collapsed in slow motion, unraveling under the weight of sealed subpoenas, frozen accounts, and whistleblower testimonies. The documentary The Custody Game aired that spring, its final credits rolling over a photo of 3 tiny hands holding their mother's fingers. It didn't name names. It didn't need to. The audience felt the truth in every frame. The ripple effect was swift. 3 separate law schools began auditing their ethics curriculum. Bar associations issued new guidelines for family law representation. Anonymous survivors flooded the show's inbox with stories of their own ready to speak. Amara watched the first episode alone. The girls were asleep. Yvonne had gone to bed. The living room was dark except for the soft flicker of the screen and the fire's glow. When her own face appeared calm, centered, steady, she didn't flinch. She'd recorded the interview months ago, her voice firm, but quiet. "I wasn't the perfect wife. I wasn't the perfect mother. But I knew who I was, and I wasn't going to let someone rewrite me." She closed her eyes when it ended. Not from exhaustion, but from peace. The next morning, she woke early, kissed each daughter awake, and fed them breakfast while soft jazz played in the background. Lyric banged a spoon rhythmically on the high-chair tray. Zion tilted her bowl sideways, watching the milk swirl like a scientist. Marlo had already flung her bib across the floor in protest of bananas. They were growing, not just in inches, but in essence. Personalities forming, preferences declared, syllables turning into words. Ma Lyric had said 1 week earlier, pointing with the gravity of a philosopher discovering language. Amara didn't cry. She simply whispered back, "Yes, love, I'm here." Because being here was the real legacy. Not the court victories, not the headlines, not even the book she was now preparing to publish. The Queen Who Waited, a memoir written in chapters that began with lullabies and ended in sharpened resolve. It was the morning chaos, the laundry piles, the songs sung while brushing curls, the warmth of a hand on her arm when Yvonne said, "You don't have to do it all today." Legacy wasn't loud. It was quiet, intentional. It was choosing grace over vengeance when the media asked for one more interview and Amara declined. It was choosing strength over shame when she filed her final name change and signed Amara Sinclair and daughters at the bottom of their health records. It was the moment she opened the doors of her new foundation, the Sinclair Center for Legal Empowerment, dedicated to helping women and parents navigate custody with dignity and protection. The first person to walk through its doors was a teenage mother fleeing a controlling partner. She didn't ask for charity, just clarity. Amara sat with her personally, not as a lawyer, not as a figurehead, but as someone who'd sat in the shadows waiting for the storm to pass. "You don't have to be loud to be powerful," she told the girl. "You just have to choose your story before someone writes it for you." The girl nodded slowly, eyes wet. And just like that, the legacy passed on, quiet, sure, and growing. That evening, as the girls slept, Amara stepped onto the porch of her new home, modest, warm, surrounded by trees and the kind of stillness that no longer felt like absence. She looked up at the stars. For a long time, she had feared what she couldn't see. The future, the lies, the unknown. Now she saw possibility. Each light was a reminder she had made it through. Not untouched, but undefeated. Inside, one of the girls stirred. Amara turned, her silhouette framed in the doorway, like a statue carved by time, grief, and rebirth. She whispered to the night, not to Steve, not to the past, but to her daughters, their dreams echoing faintly through the walls. "Your last name will never define you. You are born from the fire, but you live in the light."